It's Brian Rose from London Real. We are here in the city of London, and behind me is ICAP PLC, which is a company I worked at for 9 years. They're an interdealer broker, and I used to go in there for 12 hours a day, working the phones. We each had about a meter of space, and our job was to do one thing, which was to try to make as much money as humanly possible. It was a lot of fun. I miss it sometimes, and sometimes I'm very glad I left. This week's episode is interesting because it's with Mr. Eddie Obeng, who is an educator, and he's also a professor at the Henley School of Business. And funny enough, I had one of my old clients in on this, and his name is Patrick Vickers. You might remember him from a previous show, which we called Goldman Trader to Fight Maker. And Patrick used to trade the same things that I was slinging every day, which are credit derivatives. And it was nice to see Patrick and Eddie kind of go at it when it came to different ideas as far as banking, management, and that kind of thing. So a little bit different episode. It felt like almost like an episode of Crossfire from CNN back in the day, but it was a lot of fun. We've just dropped the Daniel Pink episode this week, and the response has been fantastic. If you want to get a copy of his book, To Sell is Human, then just tweet out a quote from that episode. It was really interesting having him on and talk about some of his ideas as far as what motivates humans. And it was interesting because his conclusion is that the more money actually doesn't motivate someone, and that they really want autonomy, mastery, and a purpose. And it's actually kind of why I left this whole city environment, was to find that. And it's something I'm trying to find with London Real. Some days I find it, some days I don't. So check that episode out as well. We are sponsored by Audible.com, and you can get a copy of Daniel Pink's book, To Sell is Human. If you actually want, you can pick up a free copy of that book. If you go to audibletrial.com/London Real, you can get a free 30-day trial and get a free copy of that audio book, To Sell is Human. I'm really enjoying this book. I don't read a lot of books, and he actually has some interesting things about what motivates us, you know, how we all actually sell, whether you're selling your kid to brush his teeth or whether you're selling your boss and why you should keep your job. So I really like listening to him. It's a little bit of a change up from some of our psychedelic stuff and some of our PTSD, but it's a nice change as well. We are also sponsored by the guys at On It. Alpha Brains in the house. I'm dropping one a day, 2 on podcast days. If you want to check that stuff out, go to londonreal.tv, click on the banner. It'll take you to On It Labs. CEO Aubrey Marcus is cooking up the best stuff over there, like the Hemp Force Protein, the Shroom Tech Sport, which I use before kettlebells. And if you click on the link, you can check out all of their products. As usual, come join the party with us. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook with our group London Realers. We just got a subreddit on Reddit, which we're doing a lot of Q&As with our guests. Dr. Robin Carhart Harris had like one of the biggest Q&As they've ever had. We hit the front page of Reddit with like 1,300 comments, and it was awesome. So come check us out there. Send me an email at info@londonreal.tv if you want to intern with us. We just need 10 hours, 2 hours on Sunday. We're having a big meetup here in London at the studios at the end of March, so come get involved. And that's it. If you want to help me out, share this on your Facebook or on your Twitter. And for now, I give you Mr. Eddie Obeng and Patrick Vickers. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. With me today is Mr. Patrick Vickers, who is a former guest. He used to be a credit derivatives trader at Goldman Sachs, but don't hold it against him. I used to do business with Patrick's company when I was back in the city a couple years ago, but he left 2 years ago to go pursue a career in MMA as an amateur fighter and as a promoter. Is that right?
Professional fighter, but subsequently retired, and as a promoter, and we had a great year last year. 12 shows in 9 countries.
That was for Cage Warriors,
For Cage Warriors, yeah.
Fantastic.
So that was a eventful year, and I learned a lot. So
awesome. If people want to learn more about you, they can go back to your episode, which was over a year ago, dude. It was like December 2011. It's called Goldman Trader to Fight Maker. I made that title up myself. I hope you like that. And so if you want to check Patrick out, you can go watch that episode. And our guest today is Mr. Eddie Obeng, who is a British educator and author. He's also a professor at the School of Entrepreneurship and Innovation at Henley Business School. He's also the founder and the learning director of Pentacle, which is a virtual business school. And Abbie National has called him their secret weapon. That's quite a compliment.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Eddie, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
You also give a mean TED Talk.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Thank you.
I must say, cool. It's very good. And, you know, if people don't know TED, actually, Patrick had just heard of TED recently. I thought everyone knew TEDs, but it's a group that, how would you describe TED, actually, if someone who has never seen one?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea behind TED was Chris Anderson was looking at ways of bringing ideas around technology and entertainment and design to the world. And it started just by collecting talks and filming them. And then it took off from there. And they put the talks on the internet, and it took off a bit more. And then they got organized. And between him and Bruno Gusiani, they sort of managed to curate interesting sessions with a number of different speakers. And then people rolled in to listen. And then it took off, and the rest is history, I think.
It's quite a select audience. I mean,
yeah, I think they claim to have X number of billion views so far, and it's a mix of people. So it's people in schools. So lots and lots of schools watch it as a way of seeing what the world is, because you've got speakers who've got backgrounds in things like technology. I mean, I'm an educator, so for me, it's about trying to help people to learn, then you've got all the sort of artists and the entertainment side. So it's quite a mixed group. And then you get people who are cutting-edge innovators also looking to see what's new, because often people go to present their latest, coolest, slightly wacky stuff. It's quite an interesting mix.
Yeah, no, I think it's quite an honor to be asked to talk at a TED Talk. It's not, they don't let
yes, it is actually, yeah. No, they don't just let anyone in.
They don't let the riffraff in.
That's what they said to me anyway.
Okay. You know, I watched a video recently when you were, I think, at Harley Davidson in the States, and you were giving it wasn't a talk there. You looked like you were giving one of those management, like seminars where people have to get involved. And I was wondering, I mean, you've championed a concept called New World Management. And I was wondering, when you walk into a company like Harley or any company, is there a common problem that you see like right away?
Yeah. The problems are really similar. It's not a common problem, but the problems are really similar. What happened was, mid-90s, I stumbled across an idea which really changed my life. And the idea was very simply this. I was looking at what was happening in the business environment. I teach management. And for most of my clients, what I found was more new stuff was coming along which they hadn't anticipated. So they were constantly being surprised. We didn't expect that market to grow up. They were constantly being surprised. At the same time, technology was sort of feeding it. This is the early days of the internet. So things like, I don't know whether you're old enough to remember things like Netscape.
Yeah. That was the first browser, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Was sort of coming in. So all these things were happening. And what occurred to me was that the pace seemed to be going up. The pace of the environment just seemed to be going up. We were connecting more and more continents in terms of global trade. Things like M&A, you were a trader before, had really kicked off. So companies, instead of growing naturally, they were growing by putting two together. So they were growing really fast. They were going from, normally it would take you your life to build a business of 1,000 people. But now they'd go from a business of 1,000 people to a business of 100,000 people in 3 years. So that pace was really kicking in. At the same time, they were connecting more people, and the technology was speeding up the speed with which people could connect and communicate and work together. And so I had this understanding that we were getting a sort of an exponential rise, a sort of steady exponential rise up in terms of the pace, the change, the dynamics. And I looked at what we were teaching in business school, and we were teaching stuff which was very similar to stuff which had been taught 20 years before. When you looked inside organizations, they still have things like hierarchies. They still do. There's a boss. The boss is supposed to tell the next layer what to do, and so on and so forth.
It's like the typical Harvard Business School study.
The stuff I learned when I did my
earlier.
MBA. You with me? And I thought, gee, we're learning at a really flattish rate. The world's accelerating exponentially. I'll bet the pace of change and the complexity overtakes our ability to learn. And I think that's happened. And so when you walk into an organization, what you're aware of immediately is many of the things they're doing don't match the complex world we're in. It were designed for another era, an era when the boss had done your job before and could tell you what the job was. That's how they actually have thought about it. A job when you'd make a strategy and you sort of launch it, and it'd take you about 3 or 4 or 5 years, and the world would stay the same. A world where if you were making decisions, you didn't have to think of them on a global scale, you thought of them on a local scale, and that world's gone. But a lot of the organizations have that, and so they get pushed into things like, in the old environment, the leader just had to be the boss. I mean, the boss got it right, everyone was happy. Now, hello, you've got an organization. Everyone has to take a lead in different things. You know, whether you're junior, maybe you're talking about the latest trend and how that could affect the business. It might be that you're actually quite tangential, but you've understood what the customers are doing because you shop with people who buy the product. You know, so all of a sudden the game really is very different. So when I walk into an organization like that, I've got all this antennae up. The problems are very, very similar in terms of how the hell do we deal with the chaos? How do we get the leadership? How do we make our business more consistent so that it makes money when we're expecting it to make money, rather than making money and then we go, oh, we knew it all along, and so on.
Are you trying to like empower the individual?
Yeah, you've got to empower the individual, but connect them. You see, when you can learn fast and the world is changing, if you're trying to organize people, you can put them into different boxes because you understand what's being done. You understand, let's say, for example, you're making mugs like this one I was drinking my tea out of. You understand how you get the clay out of the ground, how you make the mold, how you heat it, how you sell it. So the leader, the boss, whoever it is, probably understands the whole thing. So you can say to the guy who's digging the clay out, just keep digging clay. Get really good at digging clay. Don't worry about the selling. Because you in your head can knit them together. But when you hit 21st century, don't forget, the guy who's digging the clay, if his stuff isn't eco, the guy who's selling it can't tell the story. So it's not just about empowering the individuals, it's about building a connected network. It's about building them into a team. It's about connecting them with their future customers. That's where all the difficulty comes, because it's much more connected and much more collaborative and much more complex.
How did it go with Harley?
Harley was good fun. I love Harley.
What did Harley think of you? Where are they located, by the way?
I knew you were going to ask me that. Somewhere in the States.
Somewhere in the States.
I got on the plane, got off, got in the taxi, went there.
So this British guy born in Ghana comes in and starts telling them. What do they make of you?
Oh, they're good fun. Yeah. No, I enjoyed it. It was great fun. The video which you probably saw, we were looking at really how you get other people to grow and develop, even though you're the leader. So I was trying to help them to look at how you do something. You've been in sport, but really how you coach very effectively. Because often what happens for most of us is we're pretty good at what we do. So when somebody comes along with a problem and they pitch it to us, the first thing we do is start solving it in our own minds. And then you're doomed, because now you've bottlenecked this connected organization, which I was talking about. What you need to do is leave the ownership with the person, but help them to solve it. So what was in that clip was I was trying to get them to break the habit of taking on board other people's problems, but instead learn how you ask questions so the person figures it out. So the model I use is a very simple one. It's called Coach, just because it spells the word out. But basically, somebody brings you a hassle. They go, "Oh my God, Brian, how are we gonna make this video work? He talks too fast." I don't know what it is. Okay, so what should I do? And what you don't say is, what you need to do is set it up with a no. You say, "Tell me again, what was the problem?" So you basically start off by trying to find out a little bit more about what's gone wrong, okay? So you check out what's gone on. Then when they've told you, well, actually, this is what was going on, you ask them questions about what's gone on. But the reason for asking them, this is important, is not so that you understand, but so that they think deeper. So you might ask them, well, why did he talk so fast? Why was he doing that? It's not so you understand, but it's so the other person understands. And then when they've talked a bit, you then challenge them. So how could you do it differently? So rather than you just telling them, you're not letting them think. So all the ownership is still with them. Now they're fully empowered. And if they're really stuck, then the H comes in, which is where you help them out with a couple of ideas. But by going through that process, it lets the person own the problem, work it out, solve it, and remember it and feel that they've grown. And that's really what that little clip was just showing. It was just showing that little bit of trying to go through that COACH model.
Okay. Do you get resistance when you come into a company? You must have had consultants come into a company over the years. I don't know if you have, and they're going to like take you through a management workshop, and most people are skeptical, right? When you get there.
Correct.
I've seen these before, and I'm like, great, I'm going to fall back, and they're going to catch me, and it's not going to be very useful. I mean, but how do you deal with those guys?
Yeah, I mean, that's I'm in a lucky place because I'm not a consultant. Okay. I'm an educator, so I'm there. My job is not to come and tell them how stuff should be done. My job is to teach them how they might do it differently. So I'm on their side. So that's an advantage to start off with. Whereas a consultant comes in and they go, this is our framework and you will stick to it. And we've worked with all these other companies. I rarely ever tell them about any companies I've worked with. I start off by usually starting to say, well, what is it you want to learn? You know, if this is the set of issues you've got, what would be great for you? And so even the cynical guys are going, yeah, sure. I'm sure it'll just be the usual old rubbish they throw at us. And so you sort of draw them into the discussion because they're telling you what's useful to them. Once they've told you what's useful to them, then it's my job to try to work out what stories, what frameworks, what tools, what ideas I can bring, which will allow them to be able to solve those issues. So I'm in a better place. But you do get people who go, oh, tell me. I had one once who said he was sort of sitting there with his arms folded, etc. And he'd obviously be rehearsing this. And he said, well, it's all right for you. You're being paid to be here. And so I said, you come for free? So of course everyone burst into laughter because we're all being paid to be there. And that made him smile because it had never occurred to him that it was part of his salary to learn and develop. It just hadn't been there. So yeah, you do get people like that, but usually the real secret is I'm not there as the boss. I'm not there as a consultant. I'm there as an educator. My role is to help them to learn, because I think in the world we're living in, if you want to make things work, you learn new ways of doing stuff. That's the way out. Often people imagine that somehow or other they can do what they've done before and it'll work. But I think a world which changes faster than you can learn, learning is pretty crucial.
The typical path for Wall Streeters, I don't think you did this, but it was to do a 4-year bachelor's degree, go work for 2 years as an analyst at Goldman or Morgan Stanley or something, then go back to business school for 2 years. Yeah. You didn't do that track, did you?
That's the track if you want to be in investment banking per se, not as a trader. Right. As a trader, typically you would go straight in.
Did you get an MBA?
Straight to the floor.
No, I did a master's. I didn't do an MBA.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was wondering, do you think there is value in that traditional, get your bachelor's, go 2 years, come back and get your MBA? Or not, because you're talking about everything changing in the world. I'm guessing you're going to say not, but maybe you are. I don't know.
No, not really. I mean, the thing is, what you have to understand is that I call it the new world, and it's a very simple idea. Basically, I think it's reality. If you ask most people, can you figure out what's happening next year? They'll say yes, and then you quiz them, they'd say no. When we had the collapse of 2007, I just remember everyone being so shocked. I remember the Queen saying, how come no one advised me, etc. And I talked to a lot of people, and you realize that in many situations, the world we're living in is quite complex. You can see patterns, and I'll talk you through patterns if you're interested. So if you want to know what's going to happen next, you can see the structure of the pattern. But the individual events, they come and go like crazy. So that's one. If you're going to do your MBA in order to learn how to think, how to see things, how to communicate, cool. But most MBA structures, I think even today, are just like the one I did decades ago. It's roughly the same stuff. They're teaching you about strategy. They're teaching all this stuff, which looks great. And when you're in a boardroom, or when you're talking to other people who've done the same thing, you have a common language, but it doesn't necessarily connect to reality. The average strategy which gets written has a shelf life of execution 3 to 5 years. If you look at the FT100, I haven't done the sums recently, but you look at the tenure of a CEO, FT100 or FT250, you'll discover that it's often shorter. I think it's about 2.5 now, shorter on average than the length of their strategies. So hello, why are you doing a strategy when the person who's executing, who's kicked off, will be gone before? It makes no sense. But we continue. It's a ritual. And there are lots of rituals in organizations. And when you do your MBA, they'll teach you about things like budgeting, annual cycles. You do your budget over the course of, who can predict forward 1 year? Whilst you're putting your budget together, it's already obsolete. Before you publish it, people go, we need to make changes. This number isn't tight enough. So what you find very, very quickly is that those things are rituals in an organization. The meetings, the travel to meetings, the budgeting, they're rituals.
And the bigger the organization, the worse the rituals?
The bigger the organization, the older it is, the longer it's been going, the more likely it is they'll have more complex and rich rituals.
Did you find rituals in the city where you were just like, why are we doing this?
Absolutely. It seemed like every 2 to 5 years you'd see a change. They'd say, okay, now we're going to push our sales force geographically rather than do it by covering hedge funds or asset managers, and things would get changed. You'd have the guys that made the most money were the people that moved all the desks around. So you'd see these guys come in and you'd say, okay, so now we've got to move these guys over here. And it never really seemed to make any sense. But, having worked for 10 years, every 3 years you'd see it come in and their org chart would change and who reports to who would change, but nothing on the underlying business.
Yeah.
And we'd go back to how we were previously. So, And the only people that were making money were the managers and the people who were justifying their jobs by changing things, and the people that were doing the actual moving, because very little tended to happen to revenues.
Wow. Just quickly, you traded through the credit crisis of '07 and '08. I was on the other end of the phone broking through it, but just can you give people what an idea of what it was like, the kind of panic going on, or lack of panic on your side when the credit crisis hit us in '07?
So there was definite panic. For the first time in my life, I was afraid that my money wasn't safe in the bank. So there was a time, just before Lehman defaulted, where people worried about AIG, people worried about Citibank, very large institutions which were responsible for people's savings, people's mortgages, people's insurance, people's health insurance. So things that are very fundamental to everyday life. And I was wondering, should I be moving my money into different places in order to ensure that it would be safe? But then you also have to think, if one goes, they're all going to go. So my view was that if a bank is going to go and is a big bank with savings, not necessarily like Lehman, but like an HSBC or one
RBS.
of those banks,
somebody would do something about it.
But if they were to let that go and they were to let people's savings go, I think there'd be anarchy on the streets. I think as soon as you can't get money out of your ATM card,
Panic.
I think people panic. There's a run on banks, and it's a house of cards. So,
Gordon Brown said it was 2 days away from ATM machines not working on RBS. I mean, can you imagine?
The thing which is, to me, is really interesting about that story and also the reorganization story. There's two. The reorganization piece is quite intriguing because they do that ritual. And what's funny for me, I wrote a book called Never Reorganize Again, because you're absolutely right. They don't work out what the fundamental problem is. And we'll come back to that because that's crucial to also understanding what happened in 2007. You see, as the world started to move, we started to create new ways of thinking about things. And we forgot the world was moving and we hadn't understood them. For me, the one I love telling is the story about the difference between wealth, value, and money. Because this is my interpretation of what blew up in 2007. When I'm teaching, I tell a story about a chicken farmer because it's funny. Okay, and I give him a name. Give me a name for my chicken farmer.
Francis
the chicken
Brian.
farmer. No, we'll go for Francis. It'll get confusing. Francis the chicken farmer. So he spends all his life and he builds a hut. Okay, so he's got his hut. So if I ask you what's his wealth, you would say a hut and some chickens. It's a no-brainer. He has no money. He's a chicken farmer. His wealth is a hut and 2 chickens. Okay, great. Then so his neighbor comes to him and says, "I love your hut. I'd love to buy it." Okay, he says, "I don't want to sell my hut." Okay, my brother's got a hut. Go and buy my brother's hut. So he goes to his brother and buys Francis' brother's hut for 10K. Okay, so let's just check. So what's Francis the chicken farmer's wealth? It's a hut and a couple of chickens.
Okay.
It's not 10K. 10K is the value that someone else placed on his hut. It's not his wealth. You with me? This is really important.
Okay.
Because it's from here on that the whole financial system starts to fall apart. So, the neighbor's sister also wants a hut. So she comes and says, "I'd love to buy a hut." He says, "No, I don't want to sell my hut. My sister's got a hut. Go and buy her hut." So the neighbor's sister buys Francis' sister's hut for 11K. This is important. So what's Francis' wealth?
Chickens in a hut?
It hasn't changed.
Okay.
Okay. What's the value of his hut?
11K.
How did it happen? Because some idiot decided to pay 11K for a similar hut. His has gone up. Nothing's fundamentally changed. Are you with me? His wealth is still a hut and some chickens. And then what's funny is his brother's hut, which he sold last year, is now also worth 11. So when one idiot buys a hut for 11K, all the huts go up to 11K. So what you realize is value and wealth don't move in step. They don't have to. They don't have to move in step. And then what's funnier is the neighbor's cousin wants to buy the hut. But of course he has no money at all. So he goes to the bank and says, "I have no money, I have no collateral." The bank say, "No problem. We've assessed the market. There's growth in the value of huts. If you buy a hut at the moment, they're worth 11K. We'll lend you 11K with no deposit." Am I describing the credit crunch? So now they lend 11K, but they go, "Oh, well, you might need to furnish it, so we'll give you 12K. Okay? And then he maxes out on his credit cards. So he buys the third hut for 13K. Are you with me?
Are you describing a bubble here?
But it's a strange bubble because the wealth hasn't changed. The value has changed. But forget the value. Once you can borrow real money against value, you can take the money and spend it on something else. You split the 3 up.
But how else do you assign a value to wealth then?
Well, now you're asking me how do you work in the new world. That's a much bigger question. First, you have to understand why they screwed up.
This is kind of the concept of mark to market, which is a
Well,
daily ritual.
But the real issue that which isn't being described, is if he earns off his 2 chickens $5,000 every year, then paying 10 grand for a hut is fine, because you're two times
you're talking about, yes, great. I don't care what he pays. All I'm saying is wealth can stay the same whilst value can track, and liquidity can do its own thing. The three are not necessarily connected.
They're definitely not connected.
Okay.
Yeah, and you're saying when they get out of parity with one or the other.
No, it's worse. It's not them getting. It's people not realizing what's going on, and that was the shock for everyone, because everyone was so confident in the valuation that the banks were marking against the valuation and not looking at the underlying development and growth of wealth.
So you touched on the 2 points that caused, in my opinion, the credit crunch, and one was poor lending and fraudulent lending to people that didn't have the capacity.
I'm sure it was fraudulent.
There were guys going in who got paid purely by the fact that they signed up a mortgage. And they were saying, okay, don't worry, you're earning how much? Oh, it doesn't matter. Just you can sign off sign off yourself. You don't have to prove how much your income is.
Yeah, but that wasn't really fraudulent.
When you're lending money to people that you know can't repay it, you're bordering on fraudulent lending.
True, but don't forget that in a market where everything's rising, the sales guy is being incentivized to sell, and he's signing up the mortgages. Everything's rising, and as long as it keeps rising, the numbers all look good. The value goes up.
But they're two distinct things.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, when the person's selling, he should have no view on whether the market's going to go up or down. It should just be whether repayments are going to are able to be met.
I agree with you. I know how it's supposed to be done. Yeah.
So the first thing is there was, people were ignoring FICO scores. They were, telling people who didn't have enough income that they could borrow take these loans out, etc., etc.
Exactly.
And the second thing was when all the financial wizards were getting involved and putting into these models and structuring everything and then selling it to insurance companies. There was an input into the model which assumed that house prices would always rise.
Correct.
So those two things, when people started defaulting, and when you actually went, so we're going to put a negative number into house prices, they blew up.
Yes.
On 2 levels.
Correct.
And then
because the assumption
wealth.
was the value would always go up, irrespective of what the wealth did. So they're out of balance. And then you've got the practices you were describing. But my question is not what did they do? That's history. My question is, why did they do that?
Greed.
You with me? Well, you say greed. We say greed, but
the financial,
greed is like one word.
But the financial guys are being incentivized to structure all this because they get paid good bonuses.
Yeah, but why were they incentivized to do that?
Because the more they sell, the more their bonus will be.
Yeah, but no, but who? Somebody set up the bonus. So why did that person make that mistake? That's what I mean by why. What's interesting is when I do my research, I do it a bit differently from normal business schools. When I was a proper business school, we used to do things like surveys. Okay, so what you do with the surveys, you interview 400 people and you say, what do you think the causes of the financial crisis were? And then 10 of them will say, oh, it was greed. And then 12 will say, it was laziness, etc. And then you publish your graph with a little chart like that. And you say, it's obviously greed, because most people say that. And a lot of the media, a lot of the newspapers, that's what they publish. It's survey information. Great stuff, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's true, because all you're doing is taking people's opinions. So the second thing which they do when they're more scientific is they look for correlations. In other words, when this goes up, does that go up? Okay? So they're looking for correlations, and they'll do lots of sums to make sure things really do correlate. But there's a problem. Every time the flowers come out, the birds start singing. We were talking about spring just earlier. Yeah? It's not the flowers which are making the birds sing. It's because the sun's come out, because it's spring. So when two things have a common cause, they always correlate. So you can read lots of correlations.
But there's no causation, right? Is that what you're getting at?
The sun makes the flowers bloom, and it makes the birds sing.
Yeah.
You with me? So the causation is from sun to flowers, sun to birds, not from flowers to birds.
Yeah.
So correlation doesn't match causality.
But so to get back to your point, then the reason that it happened was banks work on a 12-month compensation cycle.
Why?
They work on a 12-month compensation
right?
Because people want to, at the end of every year, so it's going to go back to historical, but...
Well, some bits will be historical, and some bits will be people changing things and deciding, for example, because traditionally banks weren't expected to churn out vast amounts of profits. That happened 30 years ago. If you roll back and think 30, 40 years ago, if a bank made more than 5%, it was amazing.
So you're just saying,
we changed some things.
It's saying it was endemic to the system.
But it's also it's innovation that you're talking about.
Correct.
It's financial innovation.
Exactly. But we also changed our view on what banks should be doing. What I'm saying is, for me, what I do is I map out the complexity of the causality. I don't choose one solution. So I think that if we took at the financial crisis, it's probably a little bit of the fact we decided our expectations on banks were different. Then we enabled these large organizations to work globally and dominate markets. And then at the same time, we brought a lot of people with a similar mindset through that track you were talking about. They've all gone through the same training. So there's no diversity in thought. So when one of them says something, they all go, yeah, you said it, I agree. If you said it and I agree, we're both right, it must be right. So we did a number of things. There are probably about a dozen crucial things, which then set off this train of events. That's what I call a pattern.
Okay, I understand your point. We could debate this ad nauseum, but I do understand the point you're making. As far as there's this structural issue with the way we've set up, the way everyone does business.
Exactly, and that was what I was explaining, even with the Harley Davidson thing. There's a way which people take on these rituals, they add extra bits, and it builds a pattern. Okay. And once they build that pattern.
I've got another question for you, and I want to get Patrick's opinion as well. In America, they have this saying that we kill our dinosaurs. As in the companies that don't perform anymore, for example, like General Motors, they let them go into bankruptcy and restructure, and the equity losers lose all their money and stuff. Whereas in Europe, typically, something is kept alive by the governments because the governments seem to work hand in hand with the corporations. You've probably studied both models, and are those fair assessments or not?
Yeah, I mean, they're caricatures, but they're not far off. They're not far off. I mean, if you are good enough, if you're lucky enough to be an organization which builds up massive reserves. And I won't mention of the companies, American companies with massive reserves. But there's one who make computers, and they've got so much money that if they keep their run rate up, I think they can survive for 132 years.
Apple, maybe?
I won't mention any names. Without having to make any more money.
That used to be Dell, though.
But when you're in that mode, you could well be a dinosaur. It's probably not Apple, because the company I'm thinking about hasn't actually generated any organic innovation for about 20 years. All the things they're known for are things they've bought recently and repackaged. So some dinosaurs can survive if they've got enough money. I used to have a boss who used to say, just because the tree's still standing doesn't mean it's not dead. So the American model weeds out the guys who run out of cash and are not connected to the customers. In Europe, we do actually have a different way of looking at things, and often they're looking at the bigger social, especially when you hit mainland Europe. They're looking at the whole social context, and they're saying, actually, it'll be less damaging if we just keep this alive. Now, whether that's true or not, I'm not sure.
Patrick, for me, you had a lot of your training in the States, didn't you? Your first trading was actually in New York, right?
Yes.
And when you came to Europe, was it weird to look at like the German, some of the banks, and how they're like really closely knit with some of the corporations, and like the banks were originally created just to loan money to the corporations?
So I originally traded investment grade, so stuff that's very far away from actually defaulting. But
like BMW and all these.
Exactly. But if you look at there's two great examples that spring to mind. Places. Companies that had lots of cash but refused to innovate. Mm-hmm. One is Eastman Kodak, who were the obviously original producers of film.
Right.
And I'm not sure if they actually went into bankruptcy. That was
they have now.
They've gone into bankruptcy, and they had lots of cash, but was gradually, slowly but surely, they couldn't reinvent themselves, and they went into bankruptcy. Then you have Nokia, and that was like a year and a half ago, where their sales came out and they were absolutely poor. They were losing market share left, right, and centre. Having probably 10 years ago been personally, they were the most easy to use phones. Everybody liked them, but they could never get a smartphone that worked correctly. And it was a big dilemma amongst the people that I used to trade with, was what's going to happen to Nokia, because they have these piles of cash, but they continue to lose market share, and people lost faith in Nokia, and the stock absolutely crashed. It was only a link to Microsoft. And I'm not sure if Microsoft actually eventually bought a stake in Nokia, but that was under extreme pressure. And I think the fact that it was, a European company definitely helped it out. In the States, I think things would have got significantly worse, because there is generally a feel that people will not, because of the amount of these national champions, the amount of people that they employ, and the amount of impact that it would have on the local communities, that they won't let them go.
Is one better than the other?
Is one
the European model versus the American model?
Well, I would say the American model makes it's a more efficient allocation of resources, right? Because if you're not up to it, then you die, and people put their money elsewhere. So if the government artificially prolong a company's life, then I don't think that's an efficient allocation of resources.
I mean, I used to really think quite hard about efficient allocation of resources, because that's what they taught me on my MBA. But a lot of the work I'm doing is about companies transforming and reinventing themselves.
And you have to re-educate the
there you go.
workforce.
And we also know that startups, 90% of them have failed within the first 2 years. So if you looked on the round, you really have to question, what's the best way of doing it? If you've got a company which has started, it's going with 3 years, and then you allow it to fail because you don't invest, not money, but ideas, so they can transform, is that better than letting them die and then starting up from scratch? The other thing which also...
But do you want the government's never going to invest ideas, because the government's the least innovative of any institution.
No, I'm with you on that.
If another company wants to come in and do that, then that's fine, but that's an allocation of their resources into that startup.
I'm with you on that. I wasn't arguing that the government were going to give anyone ideas. That would be very, very funny. But the thing which I'm trying to describe is that if you have an organization which is already performing, where you've got people are bought in, they're all engaged, and you give them ideas, how much investment, how much energy do you have to put in to make that really spectacular versus starting up something from scratch? And I now think starting something from scratch, even in our fast world with the barriers coming down, is much more difficult than taking something which is already working and shifting people's minds around and enabling them to grow. And so the classic view, which I would have held 15, 20 years ago, I've now dropped that because I just took it on trust. So if you're asking the European versus the American model, my answer is whichever model allows people to continue to transform is probably going to be better. And the American model assumes you can't transform, therefore you die.
But your initial example was something that's working already but needs tweaking. Whereas Eastman Kodak is not working at all.
No, that's one of my trees. So that's a dead tree.
Yeah.
And that's why I was saying, even in the American model, you can have businesses which are already dead, but just because they've got so much cash, they don't get taken out.
Blockbuster, yeah.
So they hang around messing up the market for everyone else for a long period of time, like Eastman Kodak, which is your example.
Yeah.
And so the efficient model, which is supposed to take them out and bring in space and allow it doesn't happen. And people continue buying these cameras which they don't want and giving them away because they're rubbish, etc., for 10, 20, 15 years. It's the same with some of the current organizations we have.
What about the 20-year-old that's listening to this right now, or even you at 20, and you're just about to get out of college and you're thinking, okay, I can go into this company with 50,000 workers where I can learn the ropes and maybe after 5 years become management, or there's the hot new startup down the street. I can get 0.5% of the company in equity. We don't know if we're going to make it through the next year. I know it's hard for you to give advice to people. What's the third option?
The third option is to find an organization which you're not going to end up as manager in 3 years, but you're going to be doing something useful now because the organization's of a size where they'll value you immediately.
Okay.
So those are the three options.
Okay.
I think going to the startup is exciting. I mean, I always wanted to start my own business, and I did it. And eventually, it's really exciting. It's tiring. It's fun. Takes over your life. All those good things.
It's a young man's game.
Yeah. It's tiring. That's why. It's a fit person's game.
Okay.
That's basically the secret. If you're not fit, you're going to die. Okay. It's just too stressful. So that's great. Okay. The corporate one is interesting because the corporates are going to transform, even the ones with cash. And as they transform, as they have been doing, what you discover is that there's less opportunity for you to, quote, go up in an organization. In fact, if I let you on a secret, it was rare for people ever to go up in a corporate. There's an illusion. You know how when you're on a train and the train next to you starts to move and you think you're going backwards? Have you ever had that? Okay. Now, just think about it. Most corporates start quite small. They're little triangles, okay? And so you're at the top. You start the company, or maybe someone else starts the company. You're 2 levels down. Okay, what happens next year in a corporate? You get growth. So more younger people come in at the bottom, below you. So all of a sudden, you were the most junior person. Now you've got 2 people to manage. Guess what happens next year? You get more of the same again. More younger people come below you. So you actually stay in exactly the same point, but the whole organization grows below you. Because it's growing below you, when you started, you were junior. Now you've got 20 people below you. So you imagine you've gone up in the world, but you don't go up. You stay in the same world. The organization just grows below you. So in corporates, it's always been a bit.
But you have more responsibility, and therefore you should have a greater compensation.
Fine, I'm happy with all of that, but you haven't moved your position. Your absolute position stays the same. Your relative position seems to move because there are more people below you. And don't worry about the compensation. I'm not worried about that. But you don't traverse through an organization. And so as long as major corporates are in growth mode, joining as a young person, you will get more responsibility. You will get paid more as more younger people come in below you. But the trend has been, for the past 5 years, that even the corporates aren't growing the same way. They're not growing that organic more and more down. So your youngster who joins at the bottom might get the right corporate, or might get the wrong corporate, one which is just stalled. And so that's the other option. And I think, I mean, when you're young, you sort of imagine you live forever, which is great. Some people do. But for most of us, what we're assuming is that we're not going to live forever. So you want to enjoy it as you go. Now, in the old world, where you could learn fast and the world was changing, where people could predict and their strategies worked much better, in that world, you could say, 5 years from now, I know what I'll be doing. I know where I'm going to be going. But in this complex world, it's safer to enjoy yourself while you work, while you learn, while you live your life. You fold them all into each other. You don't go, I'm going to work really hard till I'm 65 or 60 or 30 or then I'll retire and be happy.
Yeah.
You know, it's madness.
On the other side of that timeline, you just made a blog post recently about, what is it you call it, the death of retirement? Is retirement dead? And you made the kind of assertion where there is no active end of working and then start of enjoying yourself at 65.
I think you've got to be enjoying yourself all the time.
Yeah, well, what did you mean by that?
Well, I mean, if you're serious about living as you living and enjoying as you go along, what you do is you don't set yourself into a role where you get the balance wrong. So you still want to spend time doing things you love doing, fighting, swimming, whatever it is, seeing your family, etc., learning, reading books. You want to meld them all together. And you want to be doing all of those as well as your job. If you love your job, it's even better, as well as your job. So you're rolling them all together. You fold them into each other.
Is that possible as a Goldman Sachs trader?
I was going to say, if you take London as an example, there's very few people that achieve that balance.
Correct. And that's my whole point, that what we do, most of us as rituals, are things which are designed for the old world. That's why I started. They're still living as if they're going to hit 60, 65 and then retire. I mean, the government's already pushing the numbers up because the numbers don't work. We're back to our wealth value money. Yeah. Things don't work anymore. But you'll still see young people going, well, when I get to 65, I mean, goodness, when you get to 65, the world will be completely different. Are you crazy? You know, so a lot of people, even in their day jobs, the 20-year-old, are still stuck with the rituals from one generation back.
That is true.
And I mean, that's one of the huge challenges. I mean, one of the biggest projects, my new project which I'm working on, is something called Project Cube. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to use virtual environments to bring learning and working together. So traditionally, you'd study, then you'd go and work, and then you'd study a bit more, and then you'd go and work a bit more. And the assumption is your studying is good, and it'll last you 3-4 years, and then you go and, you put it into practice. But hey, these days, you want to study a little bit less, and then put it into practice, and then study something different, and then put that into practice. And the only way you can do that is if you have a continuous connection between learning and applying. And so what I've been doing with my business is trying to find ways that I can get people to learn and apply seamlessly.
Like at night they're learning and working during the day, or taking 3 months off?
You can do it on your job even.
Goldman actually incorporate that into their review process. So they provide Goldman Sachs University. So you have, when you go through your review, you have to complete a certain number of educational hours per year in order to tick that box. And you get all these different courses, from learning about specific derivative products to learning about ethical behavior in the workplace, and over a whole wide variety of different topics. So I guess, and what they're doing is allowing you time during your working day to go and complete those sessions. There's online stuff. So I guess that's in a way trying to implement what you talked about.
That's exactly what
your P&L is good, though, right?
Exactly. So,
but if the learning is good, your P&L should respond. If the learning is rubbish,
Now, then this is my question to Patrick Vickers. Did you achieve a work-life balance when you were trading for Goldman for 10 years?
So I did, but at the deficit of my body. So the things that I really wanted to do was I really wanted to be able to compete and fight at the same time.
Right.
And so I would get up, and 2 mornings a week I would go and train at 6 a.m.
Walk us through your schedule, because you had a ridiculous schedule.
So I would start work every day at 7 and finish around 6 or 7 every night. And I'd do two mornings a week training, and then every evening a couple of hours training afterwards.
Boxing, MMA, wrestling, whatever.
And so when you're young, you can do that. But one thing I've learned this year is, having had a much less strict schedule, is if you get sleep, and I've been getting 8 to 10 hours sleep every night for the past year and a half, your body can recover and can do anything, and can rise to peaks which you wouldn't have been able to hit in your 20s sleeping at a lot less. So the fact that I was living on between 6 and 7 hours sleep every night, what impacted when I was working my ability to recover. Plus I was stressing myself with a stressful job, and
so it wasn't sustainable. Really.
So and that hence the reason after 18 months I burnt myself out. And I generally think that's an extreme example about people being dedicated to sport and still having to work hard. But I generally think that people don't have a very good work-life balance.
Eddie, do you see this a lot?
Yeah, I don't think it's about balance for a start. I think the secret is to make the work bit as enjoyable as the life bit.
But I can't do MMA during
exactly. But
as much as I'd like to.
But also there are other things. I mean, part of the reason that I use virtual environments is because I watch people. And you guys live in London, but I live just outside London. And for most of the people around me, this is what their lives look like. They're sitting in front of a computer, which is modern, 21st century computer. They wake up in the morning. They get on a train or in a car. They sit in the car for an hour and a half. Unable to do very much. They arrive in the office, sit in front of another computer, usually a 20th century computer because the organization's invested. And then they do that in reverse. Every single day they just drop 2 hours out of their lives. And they're 2 hours of stressful activity because it's like sitting in a corridor, public corridor. You can't really relax, you know. And that happens every day. And I go, we've got technology. You know, technology means you can be in two places at the same time if you get a good virtual connection. You don't have to. So even just watching that, you can just lift 2 hours and give them back to them.
But can people work virtually? Yahoo just recently banned all people working from home. It was the CEO's decision, and everyone was up in arms because I think 20% of the workforce is working from home. Do you think you can really work off-site and get things done in an organization?
Yeah, because they probably were working virtually, but not really virtually. I'll explain. The world I live in, I've got partners in different parts of the world who run part of the virtual business school. The way we work together is we have Cube, and Cube is an avatar-based three-dimensional environment. So the way my world looks is I get in the morning, I have a look. If the person's there, I switch my avatar and we go and chat. We sit around the table like we're sitting around today. If we're working on a document, we scribble, we type into that real document, real life, and then it's in the cubicle for us, for later or for us to print or whatever. So we're doing real work, collaborative work, like you do in the corridor when you bump into somebody, but we're doing it virtually. We're not Skyping and just chatting. So that basically I'm dressed from the bottom up and the rest of the time I'm in the fridge.
That does happen, right?
That's not what we're doing. We're actually doing real work. And for me, that has been a really important part of developing the virtual business school, that the environment must be so effective that you can do real work. And I suspect the Yahoo one, I don't know what they were using as their platform, but I had somebody today suggest to me they were going to work collaboratively on Yammer, which is great. Yammer's great. I like Yammer. But all you can do is send a text message. You can't put an image up. You can't look into each other's eyes. You know, with ours, you can switch the head of we call them Cubots or avatars on, and we can video conference, and we can walk around the room, and we can break into different syndicates. We use it for teaching, but I also use it for running my own business.
Gotcha. So technology is potentially the key.
But it's getting technology to help you with your life, not getting technology because it's cool.
Okay.
And that work bit, it's really crucial to start to think about the work and the learning together, as you described, but also blending them so that it doesn't start and end in one place. And if you started to do that, some of the pressures, I think, might start coming down. I mean, the fitness piece is quite
very
crucial.
hard on a trading floor, but still.
But it's the construction of a trading floor. Why are trading floors organized that way? I mean, you're working with people around the world, aren't you? So I get you basically get in really early in order to use a machine which is on a trading floor. Why is the machine on the trading floor? Why isn't it in your home in a secure box? Lots of people.
We'll get you to consult for Goldman next. I want to ask you about something you said about. There's the classic story of the fish, the man in a fish. You know, he wants to eat for a day. You give him a fish. You teach him how to fish, and he learns to eat for a lifetime. But Eddie, you've got a third spin on this thing, and I didn't actually understand it when I read about it, and I was wondering if you could kind of explain, because I think you're saying that's the old world way of looking at things.
Yeah, I mean, we know now that giving, the quote is, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, teach him to fish, you feed him for the lifetime, whatever it is. It's actually not true. In fact, we know from a lot of the aid projects that giving a man a fish actually impoverishes the whole environment.
Right, kills them all.
Well, exactly, because if you give away the fish, it screws up the local economy, so the other fishermen can't sell their wares, they're hungry, so even that proverb is a bit dodgy these days. Okay, but what I'm looking at is I'm trying to understand how you might get to an answer. So I've taken it one step further, which is maybe you teach him to learn how to fish, because he can learn how to fish, he can learn how to swim, he can learn how to build an aeroplane, because the thinking process, the patterns are all the same. It's a way of approaching challenges.
Is this meta learning? You would teach a man?
It's meta learning.
So you teach him to learn how to learn.
And then there's one level above that, which is before he even begins to think, I have a meta level idea that I would like to learn how to fish. he's got to imagine a fish. And so my blog is actually called Imagine the Fish.
Yeah, I had a hard time getting my head around it.
And the reason is because I'm saying, well, what could be possible? So when I joke about, or I'm serious about, I don't know, your trading floor, which is a virtual trading floor where you trade from home, people go, oh my God, that's not how it's done. That's ridiculous. And I get responses like that. And I just smile, because what they're doing is they're mapping onto what they know. We're back to the rituals, we're back to the old world again. And when you roll forward 20, 30 years, and we've done things like that, and you look back, you'll go, I can't believe we did things that way. A bit like we do with history. But with this particular turning point in mind, that actually everything is now probably possible to be done differently.
But the point you just raised about the fishermen and generally making them, their ability to learn greater, is at the core of everything that you preach, right?
Correct, yes.
Is intelligent the right word?
It's a useful word, but it's not the safest word. Yeah.
So increasing people's ability to learn is the most important thing that you can empower somebody to do.
Yeah, because if I can help them to see a different way to approach their issues, then I've moved them one level. And then they can start to look at their whole pattern. If we go back to, we're talking about the city and so on, but if you can find a different way of thinking about, so the story I told you about Francis, if that's lodged in your mind, that things can disconnect and people don't notice, just that idea, you might take that idea and apply it to something else, music. That you can have a disconnection between the enjoyment of music and the writing of music. And that idea then allows you to tackle your world in a very, very different way.
What do you think about that, Patrick? Are you skeptical?
No, not at all. I think I was going to use the word intelligent, but the more intelligent, the more flexible somebody can think about something, the better they will be able to react to situations.
Yes. The reason I was avoiding the word intelligent is because there's an assumption that it's about tests and some people are smarter than others. Okay. And a lot of it isn't just about smartness.
What about you when you trade? Now, the worst thing you want to be as a trader is you want to go with the rest of the herd, because you're going to be one step late and you're probably, or behind the herd, which means you can lose money. So like you, from a creative standpoint, if and when you go back into trading, do you ever think, like, how do I get my brain to be creative about stuff?
So I'm going to be slightly cynical first and think that most traders, probably myself included, they make money when the market trends and they lose money when the market blows up.
Okay. So you're not geniuses.
If you've ever read Nassim Taleb.
What's the book?
Nassim Taleb. But the better book before that is, I think it's called Pursuing Randomness or something like that. Yeah. And he basically thinks that people on Wall Street are basically a step above monkeys, but slightly intelligent monkeys, that all they do is they make money when the market goes up and they lose money when the market goes down. And there's very few people who actually apply independent thought, and all this money is generated because of timing and being in the right seat at the right time. And they're effectively making Fooling Randomness, that's the name of the book. Okay. They're effectively, all they're doing is being, a rising tide raises all boats, whatever the phrase is.
Yeah. What do you say?
I think that's generally right. There's definitely some very smart people, and there's some that are smarter than others. But if you look at how desks generally do, they make more money when volumes are up, and they make more money when the market goes up, or at least the market trends.
Yeah, but how does Goldman Sachs make money consistently every day of the 365-day year?
So there are obviously some people that are smarter than others, okay. But if you're looking at one thing as a whole, then I would generally agree that's then that's the right principle. But in terms of your thesis, the more flexible you can be, the more contrarian you can be. Sometimes it will cost you money, and we talked about this before. That you can predict what's going to happen, but you can't predict when it's going to happen. So I have met so many smart people who had been negative on the market for the right reasons. Look, we're over-levered, people aren't saving enough, etc., etc., etc. But they got in there 2 years early. And the way that Wall Street works is that you're on a 12-month compensation cycle. So if you're not making money for that 12 months, then they'll either put somebody else there, or they'll give you lower risk limits. And even though you've been right in terms of from a purely academic perspective, the market doesn't react for a longer period of time, and potentially lose your job.
Classic Wall Street.
So look at Paulson. Exactly. So Paulson, the guy that made more money than anything out of the subprime market, he was a contrarian, and he had the flexibility to look at these models, to examine it, and say, I think something's wrong here. And he got in relatively early, but he stayed true to his course, and he's made more money than.
He was in that Michael Wolff book or something. He was
the guy
who shorted the subprime market.
Absolutely,
right? Okay, one of a few.
But I mean, the thing is that in terms of timing, when things are going to happen, I talked about patterns. Unless you look at the whole pattern, even if you've got the right levers and go, this is what's going to happen, you miss the other actions which have to happen for the pattern to shift. And that's why we get the timing wrong. It's so difficult to work out whether people will move as fast as you thought they were, whether customers will change their habits. And that's where it gets a bit difficult. The other element in terms of this thing about intelligence also is in the new world, you get smarter by connecting to more people. So that's why I was a bit nervous about the word intelligent, because it's simply by connecting and listening and talking, you get much smarter. I don't know what happens exactly in detail on the trading floor, but my guess is that people do talk to each other. But again, my point earlier, a lot of the people have been selected, gone through the same education with roughly the same ideas. So although they're talking to each other, there's not much diversity.
Yeah, it's self-fulfilling prophecies. They reinforce everybody's...
You get smarter by talking to people.
You must have been trained as a trader with the same mindset of the guys that came before you, 10 years, 20 years.
That's the challenge.
You probably, did your P&L, ran your risk in the same way. I mean, do you think you're a product of an old mentality of trading to a certain extent?
Well, I was relatively lucky in that the product that I started trading, which is credit derivatives, only really started to get liquid, and means traded a lot, from 2000 onwards. So it's a relatively new product. So I was learning from people that had just literally started doing it. So I would like to, if I think about the last guy that I effectively worked for and what he taught me, he was a very intelligent guy, and I think he taught me how to look at risk in a pretty disciplined way. And yes, I'm sure there will have been sort of throwbacks from when he was learning and stuff like that. But because so many people were looking at the product for the first time,
you just with relatively fresh eyes.
Exactly. You look at it. There's not too much sort of entrenched thought that's gone into that.
That makes sense.
But I mean, there are a couple of things which would have come into it, because his thought process would still be governed by this 12-month cycle.
Absolutely.
Why 12-month cycle? Because
calendar year,
and, farming. That's where we started. Why month? Because the moon's gone around the earth and the fishermen are getting more fish. Hello, what's that got to do with trading? And yet that's driving a lot of it. So you end up picking up a lot of old rituals, habits by mistake. The other thing is that people who are, quote, the best in their field, sometimes they don't re-examine. I had to give a talk recently at the LSE, and I was joking about many things, but the chap who was speaking before me was talking about inflation, and inflation always makes me smile. When I was a kid, they used to calculate inflation by having a basket of goods. That's how they described it. Yeah. So you'd have bread and you'd have baked beans.
They still do RPI.
Correct.
As a basket of goods.
But when I was a kid, when they said a basket of goods and they said bread, we all ate the same bread. It was this white sliced loaf. So you knew what they meant by bread. I have no idea what they use as the bread in the basket these days. So my guess is they're using proxies to try and guess at what's happening. And of course, when you're talking about multiple breads and multiple designer breads, I doubt that, I'm going to be very rude, but I doubt that there is, in the same way as we separated wealth, value and money, I doubt there's a link between products and inflation anymore.
But everybody's basket of goods is different. So the rich city banker, his basket of goods is hotels, business class flights, cars, and then your fisherman in who's just working. His basket of goods is very much different. So it's hard.
So it's even worse. Compare. When I was a kid, most people in the middle classes, their baskets of goods were pretty similar. They ate, because this is before the infusion of different cultures, and therefore lots and lots of different types of food, even in London. Yeah, so if you ate at home, you're all eating roughly the same thing. And the game's moved on.
Let me get your thoughts on China and India. Just a general thought. We've seen China now manufacture probably every single electronic good in a 1-block radius. Let's be honest, is manufactured in China right now. Do you think at some point they're going to make a massive transformation to designing the goods as opposed to manufacturing them? Yes. And then are the people in the West, are the Harvard-educated kids in the States are in jeopardy of losing their jobs too?
Well, I don't know. I'm not usually a pessimist. A number of things. One is in terms of the design. I mean, I spent some of my time on the UK Design Council, and so I know some of the stats at the back of my head. I'll probably get them wrong, but I think China each year churns out more designers than we have in designers in total in the UK.
Probably something like in terms of quantity.
Something scary like that. So in terms of quantity. So given the fact that as they connect to more people, they'll get more ideas. there is a high likelihood that they'll start doing some cool design. I saw...
But obviously at the moment, their ability to connect is limited because
Yes.
of the social networking is limited.
Yes,
And
exactly. So that's probably slowing them down.
Yeah.
But there's no reason that they won't get to that point.
Is that because the government's cracking down on the web?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's complex in terms of the government, how the data is managed in and out of China.
Have you been to China? I haven't been.
But imagine what could happen if that was so one of the things that we discussed previously was that at the moment information is free, and for the first time ever in the history of the world,
Yeah.
everybody has access through the internet, or
In theory,
most of it.
Yes, most of us. Yeah.
Have access to the same information. And one of the reasons that I like London Real is because there is so much stuff out there. What you're acting as is a filter,
Yes.
so that we get to see
Exactly.
interesting stuff. So now the emphasis is no longer on being able to access the content, which is what it used to be about. Who could get first access to that information? What's happening to that company?
Yes.
What's happening in that country?
Exactly.
Because everybody knows, because it hits a blog, it hits a newswire, and everybody's understanding. It's about getting access to the best content.
Yeah.
And
the best filter.
And so you're acting as a curator, basically.
Yeah.
Which is a different way of trying to manage it. But it's more complex than that, because I use the word information, I just call it data. Because for me, information is very special. If you ask me how, if I say 42 what? 42 years what? 42 years old. It's all still meaningless unless you say, how old are you? In which case I say I'm 42 years old. So that gives you information. It's an answer to a question asked. I'm not 42, so it's wrong information, but it's still information all the same. So the important thing there is that the data is out there, and as you said, it's completely democratized. Anyone can get hold of it. The question is, which bits of data? What questions should we ask? And that's what you're doing.
And that's what TED does as well, I guess.
That's what TED does.
Yeah.
And it's the same process. On a bigger sphere in terms of China, there's no reason that they won't be able to design. I think the bigger challenge is the politics of the country and how that will pan out. I have no idea how they're going to get from where they are now to the future. I don't know whether the model they have will scale, will last, or whether it'll start to unravel at the
Some
edges.
say that's the best way to run that country, is through their political system.
Yeah, but it's not a single country. They've got loads of different races, tribes, groups, even different languages. So it's not uniform. When you're outside, sometimes you sort of think, well, they're all the same. But they're not. They're all very, very different.
What's the quality of design that's coming out of China? Because
There is some.
Anecdotally, like I was watching Top Gear recently, and they went to China and they looked at the cars, and all they'd done is they'd copied the Mini.
They're very good at that.
And they just made slightly inferior copies.
Yeah.
And so, yes, they're producing all these designers, but at the moment, because they have less interaction and less connectivity with the rest of the world, it seems like they're producing an inferior product, which is okay for a country that has been deprived of all those other products.
And also, in some of the cultural aspects within China, there's this thing of losing face and keeping face and not necessarily wanting to be first all the time. So even if you can produce something which is groundbreaking, you may not do it. It might be too showy. So you must bear that in mind as well.
They have a niche, and their niche is cheap labor and production. So
But labor's not that cheap anymore.
Well, it's still cheaper than.
It's cheaper, but it's still. I mean, we're
Cheap
now
enough to make
getting back. Having gone offshore, lots of things are now going back onshore. So it's getting complicated. India's slightly different. That's more complex. The language advantage they have in terms of connecting to the rest of the world, and the fact they've got a democracy, but they've got other issues
Social and political.
Because they've got a class system, which is still in place. Caste system is what they call it. So that's complex. They've had the rapid growth of cities, which means that it's hard to build really strong human networks underpinning it all, and so on and so forth. So they've got very, very different issues. The way I see the world is, as you said, the whole thing's connected. I think if you'd asked me 20 years ago, and I've been going east versus west or west versus eastern, I would see country blocks. What you discover is that, I don't know, I mean, even if you look at us, you probably started off in America, you probably started off in the UK, I started off in Africa. And here we are sitting around the table trying to work out how the world's working. Countries were just inventions. It's just another one of those rituals. And to build too much around these rituals is dangerous. The countries were relevant.
Wait till there's a war.
Exactly. When there's a shortage and then there's a war, then it becomes interesting.
Right.
But what drives the wars? It's either disagreements in terms of sets of ideas.
Resources.
That will always happen. Or resources. And at the moment, resources, although people are starving, that's not what's driving a lot of the wars. So again, by looking at patterns and rethinking, it's possible we can find other ways of thinking about ourselves.
Okay.
And that might be the way forward as we start to think about
just
China
a couple
energy.
questions before we finish up. 10 years from now or 20 years from now, what do you think will be like a big technological change that we don't see coming?
We don't see coming.
Yeah.
I suspect that a number of things which will happen. One is by then we will be far more cyborg than we are. We're already doing it, artificial limbs, artificial eyes. So I think we'll be much more cyborg.
I mean, your iPhone basically is attached to you because you don't leave the house with it.
Do you think it's going to be imprinted into your skin so you click a button and you hear it in your ear?
I don't think you need to have it imprinted. You're carrying it anyway, but it's possible. We might end up doing things like that. I think the real thing which will surprise us, which may or may not be an innovation, is the interaction between things. I'm not sure it'll all be good because people aren't very critical when they take on board a new technology. The technologies we have already, if you really wanted to enslave the world, or at least the West, I suspect you could do it without anyone knowing. I'll give you an example. When you Google, if I Google myself from my office, I get a different set of answers from if I Google myself from home or from a client's premises. In other words, someone in the middle is doing the curation for me. And because I have a belief that I'm not being filtered, I believe it.
Yeah.
And so some of those things, I wonder whether the innovation will be about driving something like that. In terms of energy, I'm less worried. I think we'll have plenty of energy. Human beings don't do that much work themselves anymore these days. The oil does all the work. We sort of pretend we do, but the oil does all the
physical work.
Yeah. In order to get exercise, we have to go and fight or run or something because physically we don't do it. Even coming up to this studio, I just stood in a lift and they brought me here. I did no work.
I walked up the stairs.
Well, there you go. Okay. So the oil does all the work, and as long as we've got sources of energy, we'll do less and less and less. So I can see that we have the opportunity for inventions which will be around enhancing our lives. My guess is they probably won't. They'll just enslave us by accident because they'll let us do less and less and less.
Okay. If you could make a phone call right now and call up the 20-year-old Eddie Obeng and give him a real piece of advice, you can't say keep going, because that's too easy. What advice would you give him?
Buy Apple shares, buy Google shares.
Yeah, well, if I wanted
Spoken like a true trader.
If I wanted to sit on a beach, but I'm not sure the 20-year-old Eddie wanted to sit on a beach. In fact, I'm not sure the current Eddie wants to sit on a beach, to be honest. I'll do it for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, then it's enough. I'll do something else. I think what I tell him is about the balance. Don't worry about work-life balance, but fold things in. Learn something, try something, work somewhere. Do it all. Don't focus on just one thing. Like I'm working my career now, or I'm working on. So juggle it around. The other thing I'd say to him also is more diversity in terms of conversations and the people you meet. That would be really useful because it would give you such a massive insight. And then I think I'd tell him just to relax and chill because life is just life. It's just it's a journey and enjoy yourself and don't get too earnest about it. And people worry about, sometimes people say, what would you like on your tombstone? I wouldn't like anything on my tombstone. I don't have a tombstone. Why would I want anything? But joking apart, it's people get too hung up on, I'm trying to fulfill this particular, set of things or, the bucket list I have to do. And I would tell him just to chill, enjoy himself, fold it all in, and keep learning and keep doing things.
We had Tim Ferriss in that chair, who's author of The 4-Hour Chef and The Work Week and all that. And he has this concept that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
That's possible.
Do you subscribe to that?
It's possible. It's possible. Probably I'm not, but because I spent 5 years. No, the
thing is,
not for me. I suspect it's probably true for some people.
Well, the thing is, with the virtual world, it's weird because you could spend time. I spend time with Joe Rogan every week listening to him. So if you listen to podcasts all the time and listen to input, it's possible, I think, to get some exposure to people you wouldn't normally have. What do you think? Do you think that's true? But his point is that you should get out the negative people in your life because you're really going to be influenced by these 5 people. And if they're all positive, you're going to be positive.
Yeah, but negative people are also useful because when you're doing new things, sometimes it's worth trying to, you're a trader, it's worth trying, you said you understood risk in a different way. It's worth trying to work out what would go wrong because that actually helps you succeed. And sometimes negative
I think it depends why they're being negative. If they're being negative for negative sake and they're restrictive to change and that kind of thing. But if they're constructive criticism is always a positive. Okay. So I think it depends how you define that.
So you agree with this 5 people?
I don't know. I think you can take good things from everybody that you interact with.
Exactly.
So maybe it's not. Maybe 5 is narrowing it down a little bit.
And it's a bit selfish as well. Just think about these negative people. They're having a bad life. You're the only good thing in their lives. And what do? You take yourself away. I mean, come on.
Life is short.
To be lived. Life is to be lived.
Short, Eddie. No, you make a good point. Eddie, how can people get a hold of you?
Oh, it's easy. Easiest way is via the website. The one I use for the sort of general world is worldaftermidnight.com.
World After Midnight.
Worldaftermidnight.com.
What that sounds.
That's just me trying to explain the new world. So that's my joke is that at midnight all the rules were changed. Okay. And there's a little podcast on there which explains some of the things I've been describing. Okay. And then my blog is imagineafish.com. So that's the other one. But it's easy to get hold of me electronically. It's difficult to get hold of me physically. Okay.
Well, we did today. Are you doing more TED Talks, or is that a one-time thing? Have you said your piece?
I think I've been asked to do another one on the power of one or something. So I don't know. We'll see.
Excellent. The book?
No, I think that's the theme for the talk. But that'll be fun. I'll probably just do a fun ad hoc thing.
See how it goes. Do you think everyone should write a book these days? And do you want to write another book, or do you think there's a place for certain people not to write a book?
Yeah, well, I'm in the process of writing another book. It's called Who Killed the Spark? It's about innovation, but I've written it as a novel because I was just having fun. Okay, should everyone write a book? I'm not sure. I mean, the purpose for writing books was to make sure that you got all your thinking lined up, because you can't backtrack in a book, and then people can follow it. I think there's so much out there at the moment that writing yet another book, I'm not sure whether it's anything more than ego, unless people really want to read it, or you've got something really special to say.
Yeah, there's an old saying.
Or you're going to enjoy it. I mean,
they say everyone has a book in them, but for some people, it should stay there.
That's a good one.
But no, I have very many guests come here, and they have books, and they're self-published, and I look through them, and I'm like, I only have so much time to read books, and so when I do sit down, I want it to be really, really good.
Well, and it's difficult. There just isn't enough time to go through all the volume of stuff, and then all the historic volume. And often people are writing books for themselves. It's an achievement, so that's okay.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
But if they're writing books hoping people will read them, that's another question, because then you write the book to say, how can I help this person's life? How am I going to grow them? How am I going to make them laugh? That's a different game altogether. In which case you wouldn't put your name on it. You'd probably use a pseudonym or something.
Yeah, that's true. Patrick, what's next for you? You actually are retired as a fighter? You actually made that call?
So I may box again.
A box, okay.
But it all depends which country I'm in.
Okay. Well, can you explain that really quickly?
Potentially looking to explore opportunities in Brazil.
Okay.
So, I've just been there for a couple of weeks. It's the 6th time I've been, and talking about learning new things and work-life balance.
Yeah.
I just think Europe to me almost seems as though Europe and I guess to some extent the States, if you look at the demographics, everything's, when you look at the markets, everything seems a little bit over mature, and there's a lot of issues that come from having lots of old people. Look at the pension issues that all the European countries and the US are going to approach. I just think potentially with Brazil, you have an emerging market, you have exponential growth, and you just have a society which enjoys life. And if I can combine being able to work there as well as having a better standard of life, then it's something that I think I should probably pursue. But there's a few other things going on, so maybe that will happen, maybe that won't.
That's as a boxer or as a trader down
there? Potentially going to work in the world of finance there.
Okay, so, and boxing maybe?
Just as an enjoyment.
Okay, but mixed martial arts for competing is done?
Well, never say never.
Unless UFC gives you a call.
Never say. The UFC is not going to give me a call, but never say never.
Fair enough. Patrick, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It's really nice having you on. Loved you for the first show, and this was perfect because you guys were talking the same language. Kind of. Eddie, thanks for the great debate. I did not expect that we would have this conversation.
Brilliant.
By any means. So it was really a big pleasure having you on. I hope people check you out. You must watch his TED Talk. It's crazy. I think you're wearing that same shirt too on the TED Talk, maybe.
No, I've got more than one.
Okay. It looks good on you. So that's it. If you're listening to us on iTunes, if you could subscribe. If you want to see our extremely good-looking faces, come to YouTube. It's channel London Real TV. We're on Twitter as well. Come follow us. It's a lot of fun. And we've got a group on Facebook called London Reelers, where people post TED Talks, they post ideas, they post MMA videos. It's a lot of fun. A lot of people get involved. And we're on Reddit, which is a great little kind of, I call it a forum of forums where everybody talks. And a lot of our guests are doing Q&As. Maybe even we'll get get Eddie to do one, via remotely and all that stuff. You do everything remote. So that's it. Thanks for joining us, and until then, guys, it's about the journey.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome to London.
You know,
Exactly.
are you the kind of person who wants to buy something at something really useful at a fair price? No. I mean,
that's so obvious. Yeah.
So are salesmen dirty in this way? I think you had an article where you talked about like an introvert extrovert salesman curve and